The Holy Gospel according to John. After he appeared to his followers in Jerusalem, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he had said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." The Gospel of the Lord. So around 10 years ago, I was leading the worship band at a church on the East Coast, and one day I was in the car with the pastor of that church, whose name was Matt. We were driving along a scenic road in upstate New York, and we passed a large field full of beautiful flowers. There were all sorts of colors. I remember mainly purple, yellow, and red, but I think there were even more varieties than that. This field was so full of flowers that it just looked like a sea of flowers, with no grass even showing underneath. Matt had been there before, and he said it was one of his favorite spots because there was no real reason for that huge field to be there. All the land surrounding it was farmland that was being used for one specific reason or another, but this just existed for the sake of it, and Matt thought that was beautiful. Now, obviously, the flowers hold an important function on Earth for bees and other pollinators. The beauty of those flowers, however, is something that doesn't have to exist, but does. It made me think of a quote from an old Sherlock Holmes story, where Holmes says randomly in the middle of a case as he walks by a rose, "What a lovely thing a rose is. Our highest assurance of the goodness of Providence seems to me to rest in the flowers. All other things, our powers, our desires, our food, are all really necessary for our existence in the first instance. But this rose is an extra. Its smell and its color are an embellishment of life, not a condition of it. It is only goodness which gives extras, and so I say again that we have much to hope from the flowers." I think the point that Sherlock is making here is an important one. The goodness of God, or what Holmes calls providence, is evident in the things that may not be strictly necessary in an evolutionary way for our existence, but things that really make life worth living. Holmes calls these things an extra, and that extra is a sign that there is more to life than just surviving. Now, in our world, if certain things have no obvious monetary value, it's easy to dismiss them as unimportant. But a lot of the time, these are the very things that should be commanding our attention. They are things that give us hope in the goodness of the Creator. Think about the reading from Genesis that we just heard, where it describes the trees that God made as pleasant to the sight and good for food. Now, a tree that's good for food is necessary. A tree that's pleasant to the sight, however, is not necessarily necessary. It's an extra. It shows that there is more to this life than just what we think we specifically need. So even though it might not always seem like it, especially when we have a late arrival of spring-like weather, there's a reason why the season of spring is always connected with the idea of rebirth, rejuvenation, and resurrection. We can see it in the natural world all around us as things eventually begin to bloom and grow. It's even more apparent after a long winter where it can feel like things may never actually bloom again. But as Holmes said, we have much to hope from the flowers. In our gospel reading today, the disciples are kind of in a difficult state. They've seen Jesus a couple of times now after the resurrection, but the high of Easter is starting to wear off. They're not really sure what to do with themselves, so Peter just says, "Well, I'm going fishing," and the rest join him. For them, fishing was their occupation and way of life before Jesus. So their futile night spent trying to catch fish is really representative of them reverting back to their old lives before Jesus' ministry, crucifixion, and resurrection. It was a familiar thing to them in a time where they seemed to be lacking in purpose. So instead of moving forwards, they were moving backwards until Jesus was revealed to them again. We can't be too hard on the disciples, though. Humanity is notoriously bad with doing this. Again and again, we collectively end up reverting back to how things have always been done, especially in difficult times. This is something that's happened during COVID many times already, mostly with less than optimal results. One interesting thing, I think, is that when the whole earth was basically locked down, we found that pollution in the cities and the air quality improved drastically. The waters in Venice started to clear up. Dolphins returned to the canals in Venice. And then, instead of going, well, maybe there's a better way we should be doing things, as soon as things went back to normal, the air quality worsened and the waters got murky again. It's as if we didn't learn anything. So true spring-like renewal, like the type that Jesus offers, can lead to things being unrecognizable compared to what they were before. In the middle of winter, I often look back at pictures I took during the summer and marvel at how different everything actually looks. Perhaps this is similar to how the disciples failed to recognize Jesus after the resurrection, even after he reveals himself to them multiple times. A literal renewal has taken place after death, and Jesus looks different, even to his closest companions. So if the world really does change, it'll probably look unrecognizable to us, like Jesus to the disciples. And that can be a scary thing. It's also something that will be a threat for those who benefit from the status quo. There's a reason why Jesus was targeted to be killed in the first place. Change has never really been something that's easy for us collectively as a species. So the temptation to go back is strong. But if the disciples only ever stuck with their way of life, the way that they were before Jesus arrived, not only would they not have caught the amount of fish that they needed anyway, they would have denied themselves the transformative power of the gospel. So what do we do? Well, Jesus leads by example here. He serves his disciples, makes breakfast for them. There's a lot of extra to go around here. There's so many fish that they're surprised that the net isn't torn. Jesus didn't have to do any of that, but he's showing us the path forward. And there's also redemption for Peter. There's a poetry in Jesus asking Peter 3 times to declare his love, which gives Peter a chance to redeem himself of the 3 times that he denied Jesus. But there's also, with that, a call to action. Each time, Jesus has a direction for Peter. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Feed others. Take care of them. So why do people still go hungry? It's not because there's not enough food. In fact, there's enough food produced on earth to feed every single human being. Actually, there's more than enough. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations says that globally we produce enough food to feed 10 billion people. And yet, estimates are that nearly 1 billion people are what is considered chronically undernourished. And before we think that this is a problem that only affects less developed parts of the world, it's good to remember that there are people in our very community that are going hungry too. So clearly the system is not working. There's a bottleneck somewhere. Perhaps a renewal is needed. It can be overwhelming to look at the problems facing our world with a realistic view. The problem is so big, so how can I actually do anything about it? So I can relate to a bit to where the disciples are emotionally at the beginning of the gospel today. It's been hard to find any sort of forward momentum these last couple of years, and even hard to find hope a lot of the time. I was listening to an interview this past week with the surviving members of the Canadian rock band Rush, one of my favorite bands. And the interviewer asked them if they considered themselves hopeful people. One of the members mentioned that he had more faith in people a couple of years ago than he does now. And the other said that he figures the last 4 to 5 years have really done a number on hope. So when the flowers aren't blooming, and when the skies are gray and energy is low, where can we find that hope? Well, I've mentioned before how I think good stories help us see ourselves and the world around us in different and new ways. So imagine for a minute your favorite character in a story that moved you. Most likely that character goes through an arc, right? They begin somewhere and they go through a time of hardship or challenges and continue through to a transformative experiences that puts the character in a different place than where they were at the start of the story. Now imagine if that character ended up in the exact same spot at the end of the story that they were at the beginning. There was no growth, no adventures, and no change. That wouldn't be a very satisfying story, would it? But the disciples were in danger of doing that before Jesus appeared to them again, setting them on their new course. It's a temptation for us as well, I think. But to their credit, when Jesus instructed the disciples to cast their net on the other side of the boat, they did listen. They could easily have just said, "Look, we don't know who you are. We've been fishing all night, have caught nothing, and 2 feet on the other side of the boat is not going to make a difference for us catching any fish." I wonder how many times in my life I've said stuff like that. Probably far more than I'd like to admit. But with the hope in things yet unseen, just like Paul mentions in the reading from Romans today, the disciples begin to bring themselves out of their funk, and they cast the net on the other side. The challenges will come as surely as gray, rainy days that seem to hold off spring. But the response to those times is what allows us to grow, to enter into renewal, even if what comes out of the other side seems unrecognizable to us. In that Sherlock Holmes story, those around him were surprised by his monologue about the rose. They were used to him being a cold, calculating reasoner. But that was only one aspect of Holmes's character. It might seem counterintuitive, but when Sherlock Holmes was really struggling, we see in the stories that he would often go do something else completely unrelated to the problem at hand. So he was a big fan of violin music, and there are multiple stories of him attending concerts in the middle of a big case. This allowed his brain time to renew itself, and he was able to come back fresh, able to see things in a different way, or at least have organized his thoughts in such a way that he could make new connections. Now, obviously, Sherlock Holmes is a fictional character, but psychologists since then have actually discovered that his methods of renewing his brain when he had a big problem to work out are valid and apply to us in the real world as well. So we can learn from Holmes's example. It's important to appreciate the extras. The roses, the music, the stories, the smells, the experiences that might not seem like they're contributing to our survival, but those end up being what makes survival worth it. Like Holmes, we can recognize the goodness in the world around us. Perhaps this will help us take a new view of problems that are facing us, of which there are many. And like Jesus, we can channel that goodness through our actions toward others. If we really did what Jesus was commanding Peter to do in this, our world would probably be unrecognizable to us. So let us not fear renewal or stubbornly deny it. Let us embrace it and carry it out for others. There we may find the hope that we have been longing for in these times. We have much to hope from the flowers. Amen.